Greetings, exiles. This is Cod Raziel coming to you with Sir Reginald Amadeus Fortescue III and Frank. And today we're going to be going over Fabulous Frank's Festive Fern Trickster. First off, what this build is it's basically just a freezing pulse build that's trying to make freezing pulse great again by using a couple of interesting uniques. A couple of pros of the build. It's reasonably cheap to start. It's relatively fast clearing compared to some of my other builds, and well, yeah, it makes freezing pulse great again. Disadvantages basically resistance gearing can be tough, and it's not very good in isolated boss fights because without ads you can't generate charges. This is why I use Vile Breach in the build. Now, let's just go over the passive tree and the ascendancy points real quick. First off, I'm using Ghost Dance because it's the one thing between me and Shade Form. Next, I'm picking up Shade Form. This gives us a massive boost to energy shield, it gives us some evasion rating, and it gives us occasionally some cast speed. Next we have Swift Killer, which gives us an extra frenzy charge and also helps with frenzy charge generation. Lastly, we can either pick up Weave the Arcane or Walk the Ether. This is all about personal choice. Weave the Arcane will help us sustain our mana a little bit easier, and it will also give us 8% damage reduction, because spending 200 mana is not difficult to do on this build. Walk the Ether on the other hand, that gives us 20% cast speed if we've used Lightning Warp, and it also uses our Lightning Warp for free. As for leveling this build, I pretty much leveled as freezing pulse the whole way through, and it was pretty crazy. Once you equip the Tulborn once, you do so much damage that it trivializes the trip to Merciless. I've added some leveling trees in the build guide below. Now, as for the main passive skill tree, I'm just going to go over the sort of important points in lieu of going over the entire tree like I normally do. There is obviously a full tree in the written guide. So first off, we pick up Elemental Overload for some extra damage since we don't scale at crit. This is pretty much the best option for us. We then grab Chaos Inoculation obviously with Ghost Reaver and Vile Pact to sustain our large ES pool and keep it full nearly all the time. Next we're grabbing the Witch and Shadow power charges as well as the Ranger and Shadow Frenzy charges. These are basically because most of our damage comes from our charges. We then pick up the kinds of damage that apply the freezing pulse, projectile damage, elemental damage, spell damage, that sort of thing. We also, on the way to all of these things, pick up 5 jewel sockets to help round out our damage, our energy shield, our resistances, and our stats. One last little notable thing that we get is Heart of Oak. We get this because stun avoidance is actually quite powerful if you cannot use Valerium or you cannot use Eye of Cholula. So now let's just quickly go over our gear. First off, we're using a Tulborn Spiraled Wand. This is the Tool unique wand that drops in Breach League, and hopefully will continue to drop since this video has taken so long to make. This adds 10 to 20 cold damage to spells per power charge, giving us a massive 70 to 140 cold damage to spells per wand. And on the Shadow version we use 2 of these. This also gives us a chance to gain power charge when killing a frozen enemy, which means that we don't need to bother with power charge generation. My offhand, I've just got another one. This one with Culling Strike Corrupted. Since these ones are so cheap, you can corrupt them with just about anything you want. For my helm, I'm just using a basic Hubris Circlet, decent ES, some resists, and most importantly an open suffix to craft chance to avoid being stunned, which is a Leo craft that he gets at level 5. For our body armor, I'm using a Widow Silk robe. You could probably better use a Val Regalia, but I cheaped out, bought a Widow Silk robe, and ended up rolling a nice 733 ES on it. Our gloves are surge binders. Now these things are great. These things give us a total of about 98% increased elemental damage based on our frenzy and power charges. The rolls we want on this is 7% increased elemental damage per frenzy charge and 7% increased spell damage per power charge. In addition to that, we'd like a low reduced endurance, frenzy and power charge duration. For our boots, I'm using some high resistance sorcerer boots that I managed to buy for relatively cheap. I would say prioritize resistances on this piece of gear more than any of the others, since it doesn't require any special crafts or anything. So basically a bunch of resistances and movement speed, and as you can see I crafted % increased energy shield onto them. The enchant on these is 0.6% of damage leeches life and mana when you've killed recently. The reason for this is I like to have more leech. The more leech the better. And this also helps us when Warlord's Mark is down or can't be used in a map to sustain our freezing pulse. Alternative to this, you can use +1 frenzy charge corrupted sorcerer boots. When I went shopping for them, they were a lot and they were pretty cheap. Our belt is a Doriani's Invitation. The reason being, this gives us a decent amount of increased damage and resists, as well as giving us 0.2% cold leech, and also giving us 10% chance to freeze while using a flask. Freeze chance is actually pretty important on this build, since if you're not using Ice Bite, you need some way to freeze the enemies that are further away from you. Freezing Pulse does have an innate 25% chance to freeze at melee range, as far as I'm aware. Next, we're using 2 Snake Pit rings. These give us an extra projectile for our freezing pulse and also increase our cold damage and cast speed. Next up, we're using the Alar Dex. This is another interesting item. Because we're not scaling the crit of the power charges, we can use this without messing with the drawbacks. This also has a really high increased power charge duration roll on it, which can make it that much easier to fight a lot of bosses. In addition to that, it grants us +1 power charge for some more flat cold damage, and since they're so cheap, you can corrupt it for +1 frenzy charges relatively cheaply. For our flasks, we're using Atsu's Promise for the extra added chaos damage and leech. We're using an Overflowing Chalice. This is just to keep our other flasks up when they run down too much. I am using a Dying Sun Ruby flask. This is not required, but it is really nice to have since it adds another 2 projectiles. In addition to that, I'm just running the usual Remove Bleed flask and the usual Remove Freeze flask. And that is it for the gear. Now, I'm just going to go over some of the more important gem links. Most important, the main DPS setup, which is Freezing Pulse, linked with Controlled Destruction, Spell Echo, Ice Bite, Life Leech, and Cold Penetration. Now, if you're using the Green Dream and the Doriani's Belt, you can remove Ice Bite in favor of greater multiple projectiles or Hypothermia. It's up to you if you want to go either route. I found that Ice Bite dealt more than enough damage for the maps that I was doing. Next, our mobility setup is Lightning Warp with less duration and rapid decay. If you're comfortable having your auras in a weapon, you can add faster casting and put this in your helm. For our auras, we're using Discipline, Blasphemy with Warlord's Mark. That can all go in our weapon if you're comfortable with the whole weapon swap losing your auras thing, or alternatively it can go in your helm. Inside our boots we have Orb of Storms with Power Charge on critical, Curse on hit, and Warlord's Mark. This is just to provide some long range cursing ability to us. Our gloves have a cast when damage taken set up with Immortal Call and Vortex along with increased duration, just to slow the enemies that deal damage to us and give us a little bit of a break on physical damage. Lastly we have Val Breach linked with faster casting and Summon Lightning Golem. Lightning Golem is the best golem for this build because of the increased damage from cast speed and also the added lightning damage on occasion. The Val Breach will be used on bosses, as can be seen here. You obviously don't want to do this if you're not comfortable with the map boss. It can be quite dangerous, especially on hardcore. And that about wraps it up. If I missed anything, I apologize, and I'm sorry that it took so long to release this video. I hope I didn't fall over myself too many times in this little recording, as I am doing it all at once. So, from myself, Sir Reginald Amadeus Fortescue III, and Frank, we say good luck, stay juicy, and make Freezing Pulse great again. I've put a link to the preview in the top here somewhere, and also subscribe to my channel if you like this kind of content. You know, tired me talking about Freezing Pulse. And I'll just put some random video up there somewhere. Anyway, enjoy Breach League, guys.